Schema Business School.
Hello everyone, welcome aboard. In 2017, there has been a spectacular increase in country risk. Think of Brexit, of course, of Catalonia, of North Korea, of Turkey under Erdogan, but think also of Donald Trump in the White House. Country risk today is on the front page of newspapers all around the world. Debt crisis, terrorism, political upheaval, exchange rate volatility, you name it. But what does country risk mean actually? Well, the traditional definition of country risk has to do with cross-border investment. You have an investor or a banker who decides to hold claims and assets in a foreign country. Risk then stems from the ability, but also the willingness, of course, of the country to pay you back in full and on time. So we have a combination of economic, financial, and socio-political risk. But is country risk the monopoly of foreign investors, after all? Donald Trump in Washington creates uncertainty and risk for US companies which export in Mexico, for banks, for households, and for the man of the street, Mr. Smith. What about Maduro in Venezuela, if you live in Caracas, or Mugabe in Zimbabwe, or Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, if you live in Manila? And you can have large risks that are not financial, such as legal and regulatory, or reputation risk. So country risk can affect both domestic and international economic agents, and it must be tackled taking into account the country's specific situation in the globalized system. Indeed, any country, including the US, Spain, or France, can be contaminated by the spillover effect of regional and global crises. As you know, globalization has become an echo chamber with strong feedback effect. Think of global terrorism, of higher interest rates, or the volatility of the US dollar, or fluctuating commodity prices, or also the consequences of downgrading by rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P's. A good example is a consequence of the socio-political upheaval in Catalonia, on the Spanish economy and on the cost of the Spanish debt. Catalonia's financial impact has been impressive. Yields on the Spanish debt increased from roughly 1.5 to 1.8% in less than 2 weeks, and the stock market in Madrid has lost 3% in the beginning of October 2017. In fact, the issue is not so much to eliminate country risk, but to spot it, to measure it, and to mitigate it. Insurance companies such as Aon, MIGA in the World Bank of Washington, or COFAS attempt to map out country risk to facilitate identifying risky spots of the spread of violence in specific regions. That's fine, but that doesn't tell you where risk will come from. What are the opportunities, even in risky countries, and what to do to mitigate risk? Hence the need of robust analysis and scrutinizing early warning signals of spillover and contagion. In fact, what makes country risk a fascinating topic to study and to manage is a combination of country and risk. So we need to assess what makes a country volatile, looking at its history, its values, its culture, its political and institutional system, and of course its macroeconomic framework. Assessing the quality of governance is at the heart of the analysis because you have many rich countries with poor people, and this has nothing to do with climate change, but with wealth and political power concentration, in plain English, corruption and bad governance. First of all, the country risk analyst will focus on the specific risk factors of a given country. He or she will tackle the macroeconomic risk, including inflation, budget deficits, investment, productivity, and economic growth. Then the country's monetary policy, including exchange rates and interest rates. Country risk managers, indeed, will overlook the evolution of the real exchange rates to assess the competitiveness of the country's exports of goods and services. Well, when all that has been done, the country risk analyst has done half of the job. Why? Well, the analysis will shift now to the risk elements that come from the globalized economy, including global growth, commodity markets, exchange rates and interest rates, global trade, and so on. Let's look, for example, at a couple of global risks. In 2017, the world's population numbers nearly 7.6 billion people, implying that the world has added 1 billion inhabitants over the last 12 years. Impressive. 66% of the world's people live in Asia and 17% in Africa. But this is today. Indeed, the 50 least developed countries, the poor countries, grow at an impressive rate of 2.4% per year. Overall, their combined population will increase 33% by 2030 to reach around 1.5 billion people. That raises global risk and also country risk, for instance, in the north and the south of the Mediterranean basin, if the north does not help the south to boost inclusive growth and jobs, and also if African countries do not help themselves by improving governance and development prospects. But look also at the US economy and its impressive economic recovery. But for whom? It experienced a long-term real wage stagnation and a persistent lack of economic progress for a large share of its population since roughly the late 1980s. The share of national income received by workers fell from 65% in 1974 to less than 57% today. But this is the same situation in most OECD countries, not mentioning large wealth gaps in most emerging countries, which do not transform economic growth into inclusive development. Well, when most risk elements have been analyzed, the time comes from cross-country comparison. You might have a country with a low risk, but with a weak market potential, or a high-risk country that you cannot afford to keep outside your business strategy targets. Think, for example, of India, or China, or Brazil, maybe Russia. So everything, in fact, is a matter of combining risk and opportunities. Now, keep in mind that this risk map is just a snapshot at a specific time. Then you need to make it in 3D by projecting the impact of time in the future. And believe me, that's easier to say than to do. Well, in fact, it is not surprising that this is highly difficult and indeed risky to make long-term projections for the future of a country's socio-economic development. Who will be the winners in 2050? Remember that back in 1945, Ghana and South Korea had exactly the same GDP per capita. Productivity, capital market access, demography will be of crucial importance in boosting or slowing down the pace of change and modernization, as well as values, infrastructures, and institutions. In a nutshell, the quality of governance. There is a number of key components of country risk, including political, macroeconomic, but also legal and regulatory, as well as socio-cultural risk. But country risk does not exist per se in the abstract. It is always related to risk exposure. If you take Venezuela today, well, a banker, an investor, an exporter, or an importer do not face the same kind of risk. That's the case everywhere in Spain, in Vietnam, or even in France. Well, to wrap up, everything boils down to the quality of information and of economic intelligence. This is the best risk mitigation strategy. At Schema, in our seminar, we shall use a number of methods and analyses to tackle the fascinating but complex and changing nature of country risk. That will include a mix of quantitative and qualitative analysis, including socio-political and institutional stability, as well as a focus on countries' debt and solvency and also liquidity indicators. That will help you keeping ahead of the game and not to be caught off guard by an abrupt devaluation, a revolution, or a war. So Stay tuned. Thank you.